And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. We are live. Welcome. Welcome to Benchley Night. How is everybody? Anybody out there? Says zero. That's always a good sign. Always makes me happy. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are. Having your evening beverage in the Coffee by Morning, Benchley by Night mug from the Liberal Snowplowing Do-Gooder Fund. Delicious coffee. This is the other side of the mug. It's such a good mug. You need one of these. But before we get further, before I flog irrelevant other things, a couple of things. My beloved, the great Betty Sue, is in Easton, Maryland tonight, having a well-deserved day off. She's just done, she did like a week opening for James McMurtry, then flew to Minneapolis and did Minneapolis, Chicago, Ann Arbor, and Columbus with my friend and former client, Chris Smither, which was apparently wonderful. And then she flew today from Columbus, Ohio to Washington, D.C., has driven to Easton, Maryland, and is now probably passed out in her hotel room in Easton, about to rejoin the McMurtry tour for like the next 3 weeks. So if you're down in Easton, Maryland, go to the Avalon tomorrow night if it's not sold out already. And Betty Sue and James McMurtry will be there. I have a few people to thank. Oh, but that's a little bit further down the line. The next thing I want to flog, ladies and gentlemen, is right here, point there. You'll see there a web address, https elizabethhunter.substack.com. My beloved sister, as many of you know, went on to her next great adventure, February 27th, 2022. She was an amazing writer. I didn't realize how amazing a writer she was until I went down to, up really, because I was coming from the Forgotten Coast plein air event in Apalachicola, Florida. I flew from Tallahassee to Charlotte, and then I drove up to the mountains where her cabin was in Bandana, North Carolina, way up in the mountains. And her friend Meg and I sat around and we read some of Elizabeth's journals. Then Meg went home to her house. I spent the night at my sister's house reading more of the journals. And they're absolutely, it's stunning writing. It's stunning writing. And she kept the journals around. She did not want a book of her writing published, a collected works of, but she kept these journals around. And Meg and her friends from the Bandana Writing Group and I have all concluded that a really, really fitting thing for her, for who she was and what she did, is to use this wonderful new entity called Substack. You may know Heather Cox Richardson with her Letters from an American. She publishes that on Substack. Substack allows you to, you as the creator, or you as the creator can decide if it's going to be a paid subscription or a free subscription. Heather Cox Richardson and now us have decided that you can choose, pay or don't pay. But if you subscribe to elizabethhunter.substack.com, you will get in your inbox, whenever one of these journals is published, you'll get it in your inbox, and it is just there for you to read. It's amazing writing. And what we're going to do is her regular journals that we could find started in 1994. The first year or so are printouts, and we don't know where the originals are, but she kept the printouts in 3-ring binders. And her friend Gail is scanning them in and then turning them into Word documents and then doing proofreading. And we are uploading those to Substack. And what we're doing right now is the first few months of 1994, she just had a few postings, a few journal entries. But starting around May 1st, she got much more regular about her journal entries. So starting tomorrow, which is her birthday, we are posting each day one of these journal entries. Then starting May 1st, we move into synchronization with the day of the year that she was writing about. So starting May 1st, 2022, we are going to be doing May 1st, 1994. At that moment, the train leaves the station and you can climb on board to be part of Elizabeth Hunter's life. It's extraordinary writing. She's much more fundamentally serious person than I am. So it's heavy at times. It's a lot like Annie Dillard, if you like Annie Dillard. If you don't like Annie Dillard, you might not like it. I don't know. But I would urge you, go to elizabethhunter.substack.com and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me, and I think it would mean a lot to her, though she'd probably be dismissive of it, knowing my beloved sister. All right, we have a few people to thank tonight. The Liberal Snowplowing Do-Gooder beneficiary is Rockingham Entertainment Development. We're going to be helping out a couple of community groups this in the next 2 months, present a couple of things at the Bellows Falls Opera House, where I feel strongly we don't want the taxpayers of Rockingham, Vermont to shoulder an additional burden. So if there are kind of community building events that aren't going to pay their full weight, I want to be able to step in there and help make it happen. So your contributions to Rockingham Entertainment Development lead toward that. And we have a few people to thank. We have, as ever, my dear friend. Oh, and this, if you're new here tonight, this is the unidentified unglet in a can that if you contribute to the Liberal Snowplowing Do-Gooder Fund, you get a shout out from the unidentified unglet. And the very first person to thank is our dear, dear friend, Ms. Martha Rowley. Next up is down there in Bonneville, Massachusetts, dodging the bears. The bears are throwing bird feeders at them, ladies and gentlemen. But Mr. Gary Pierce and Aline Cortez, they just bat them away. They just bat them away. Thank you, Gary and Aline. Oh, she's a world traveler, ladies and gentlemen. She's now based out of St. Louis, Missouri. She used to be based out of Fort Worth. She just was up in Evanston, Illinois. She just had extremely good feta and spinach croissant, I believe, before she headed back to St. Louis. Ms. Terry Hudson. Next up, down there in Cincinnati, Ohio, keeping it real, keeping the Bengals in check, Mr. J.T. Mayer. Out there in Omaha, Nebraska, where the corn grows high as an elephant's eye and the elephants grow very, very tall, Mr. John Wilhelm. Out there in Death Valley, out there at Pappy and Harriet's, out there keeping it real in the Salton Sea. It's wonderful to hear from her. It's been a while. It's been a while, and I know you lost your beloved this last year. Props to our good friend Miss Dina Wolf-Garin, right here in Bellows Falls, Vermont. Man who continually finds himself in Facebook jail. for just saying what is true and not putting any varnish on it whatsoever, Mr. Rick Gavatsky, artist friend, doing beautiful, beautiful work these days. She's a good friend to the liberal snowplowing do-gooders, and she's a good artist, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Catherine Fisher. And out there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Oh, he's just a medium-sized guy in a medium-sized town. He's got an inordinate love of Pittsburgh Pirates. He's there waving a little black and yellow banner every week. His hope springs eternal, as does my fondness for my very, very medium-sized cousin, Mr. Nat Hunter, and his excellent wife, Elise. Thank you all so much. And now, tomorrow is Elizabeth's birthday, but tomorrow is also the anniversary of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And one of my absolute favorite Robert Benchley pieces, which I think I've read twice before, so this will be the third time I've read it, but it's that darn good, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be an annual tradition on the anniversary. Paul Revere's Ride by Robert Benchley. How a modest go-getter did his bit for the Juno Acid Bath Corporation. Following are the salesman's report sheets sent into the home office in New York by Thaddeus Olin, agent for the Juno Acid Bath Corporation. Mr. Olin had the New England Territory during the spring of 17. During the spring of 1775, and these report sheets are dated April 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th of that year. April 16th, 1775, Boston. Called on the following engravers this morning: Boston Engraving Company, E.H. Hostetter, Theodore Platney, Paul Revere, Benjamin B. Ashley, and Roger Durgin. Boston Engraving Company are all taken care of for their acid. E.H. Hostetter took 3 tins of acid number 4 on trial and renewed his old order of 7 queen spiders. Theodore Platney has gone out of business since my last trip. Paul Revere was not in. The man in his shop said that he was busy with some sort of local shindig. Said I might catch him in tomorrow morning. The Benjamin Ashley people said that they were satisfied with their present product and contemplated no change. Roger Durgin died last March. Things are pretty quiet in Boston right about now. April 17. Called on Boston Engraving people again to see if they might not want to try some Daisy number 3. Mr. Lithgow was interested and said to come in tomorrow when Mr. Lithgow Sr. would be there. Paul Revere was not in. He had been in for a few minutes before the shop opened and had left word that he'd be up at Sam Adams in case anyone wanted him. Well, I went up to the Adams place, but the girl there said that Mr. Revere and Mr. Adams had gone over to Mr. Dawes's place on Milk Street. Went to Dawes's place, but the man there said that Dawes and Adams and Revere were in conference. There seems to be some sort of parade. There seems to be some sort of parade or something that they're getting up. Something to do with the opening of the new footbridge to Cambridge, I believe. Things are pretty quiet here in Boston, except for the trade from the British fleet, which is out there in the harbor. Spent the evening looking around in the coffee houses. Everyone here is cribbage crazy. All they seem to think about is cribbage, cribbage, cribbage. April 18th. To the Boston Engraving Company and saw Mr. Lithgow Sr. He seemed interested in the Daisy No. 3 acid and said to drop in again later in the week. Paul Revere was out. His assistant said that he knew that Mr. Revere was in need of a new batch of acid and had spoken to him about our Vulcan No. 2 and said he might try some. I would have to see Mr. Revere personally, however, he said, as Mr. Revere makes all the purchases himself. He said I thought I could catch him over at the Dawes place. Well, I tried the Dawes place, but they said that he and Mr. Revere had gone over to the livery stable on State Street. Went to the livery stable, but Revere had gone. They said he had engaged a horse for tonight for some sort of entertainment that he's taking part in. The hostler said he heard Mr. Revere to say to Mr. Dawes that they might as well go up to the North Church and see if everything was all set. So I gather it's a church entertainment. Followed them up to the North Church, but there was nobody there except the caretaker, who said he thought I could catch Mr. Revere over in Charlestown late that night. He described him to me so that I would know him, and said that he'd probably be on horseback. As it seemed to me to be pretty important that we land that Revere order for Vulcan No. 2, I figured out that whatever inconvenience it might cause me to go over to Charlestown or whatever added expense to the firm would be justified. Spent the afternoon visiting several printing establishments, but none of them do any engraving. Things are pretty quiet here in Boston. Went over to Charlestown after supper and hung around the Bell in Hand Tavern looking for Mr. Revere. Met a man there who used to live in Peapack, New Jersey, and we got to talking about what a funny name for a town that was. Another man said that in Massachusetts, there was actually a place called Podunk up near Worcester. We had some very good cheese and talked over names of towns for a while. Then the second man, the one who knew about Podunk, said he had to go as he had a date with another fella. After he had left, I happened to bring the conversation around to the fact that I was waiting for a Mr. Paul Revere. And the first man told me that I'd just been talking to him for half an hour and that he had just gone. I rushed out to the corner, but the man who keeps the watering trough there said that someone answering Mr. Revere's description had just galloped off on a horse in the direction of Medford. Well, this just made me determined to land that order for the Juno Acid Bath Corporation or to die in the attempt. So I hired a horse at the tavern stable and I started off toward Medford. Just before I hit Medford, I saw a man standing out in his nightshirt in front of his house looking up the road. I asked him if he'd seen anybody who looked like Mr. Revere. He seemed pretty sore and said that some crazy coot had just ridden by and knocked at his door and yelled something that he couldn't understand, that if he caught him, it'd break his back. From his description of the horse, I gathered that Mr. Revere was the man, so I galloped on. A lot of people in Medford town were up and and standing in front. Sorry. A lot of people in Medford town were up and standing in front of their homes, cursing like the fella had just seen. It seems that Mr. Revere had gone along the roadside, knocking on doors and yelling something which nobody could understand, and then galloping on again. "Some goddamn drunk," said one of the Medfordites, and they all went back to bed. I was not going to be cheated out of my order now, no matter what happened. And I don't think that Mr. Revere could have been drunk, because while he was with us at the Bell in Hand, he had only 4 short ales. He did have a lot of cheese, though. Something seemed to have been the matter with him, however, because in every town that I rode through, I found people just going back to bed after having been aroused up out of their sleep by a mysterious rider. I did not tell them that it was Mr. Revere, or that it was probably some stunt to do with that shindig that he and Mr. Dawes were putting on for the North Church. I figured out it was just a little publicity stunt. Finally, just as I got to Lexington, I saw my man getting off his horse at a house right alongside the green. I rushed up and caught him just as he was going in. I introduced myself and I told him that I represented the Juno Acid Bath Corporation of New York, and I asked him if he could give me a few minutes, as I'd been following him all the way from Charlestown, and I'd been to his office 3 days in succession. He said he's pretty busy right at that moment, but that if I wanted to come along with him upstairs, he could talk business on the way. He asked me if I wasn't the man he'd been talking to at the Bell in Hand, and I said yes, and I asked him how Podunk was. Well, this got him in a good humor, and he said that we might as well sit right down then, and that he would get someone else to do what he had to do. So he called a manservant and told him to go right upstairs, wake up Mr. Hancock and Mr. Adams, and then tell them to get up and no fooling. And keep after them, he said. Don't let them roll over and go to sleep again. It's very important. So we sat down in the living room, and I got out our statement of sales for 1774. And I showed him that in the face of increased competition, Juno had practically doubled its output. There must be some reason for one acid outselling its competition 3-to-1, I said. And that reason, Mr. Revere, is that a Juno product is a guaranteed product. He asked me about the extra 6p a tin, and I asked him if he'd rather pay 6p less and get an inferior grade of acid, and he said no. So I finally landed an order of 3 dozen tins of Vulcan number 2 and a dozen jars of Acme silver polish, as Mr. Revere is a silversmith on the side. Took a look around Lexington before I went back to Boston, but I didn't see any engraving shops. Lexington is pretty quiet right now. Respectfully submitted, Thaddeus Olin. Attached, expense voucher, Juno Acid Bath Corporation, New York, Thaddeus Olin, agent. Hotel in Boston, 15 shillings. Stage fare, 30 shillings. Meals, 4 days, 28 shillings. Entertaining prospects, for £3, 4 shillings. Horse rent, Charleston to Lexington and return, £2, 6 shillings. Total expense, £9, 3 shillings. To profit on 3 dozen tins of Vulcan number 2, 18 shillings. And 1 dozen jars, Acme silver polish, 4 shillings. Total, 1 pound, 2 shillings. Net loss, 8 pounds, 1 shilling. All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, I urge you to go to elizabethhunter.substack.com, subscribe to my sister's journals. It's extraordinary writing. It's addictive. If you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. But if you kind of point, it's so hard to point at the screen, right? Subscribe. It'd be great. All right. You take good care, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.